Welcome to 21st Century Dating Decoded. We're making modern love simple. Get ready to decode your love life. Brought to you by Speed Mingle.
What if I told you that by just packing up your apartment and moving 50 miles down the highway, you could mathematically triple your chances of finding a partner?
I mean, it sounds like a scam, right? But it's actually completely backed by the data.
Exactly, because, you always hear people complain that the dating pool in their city is basically a puddle. And we never stop to realize that they might be statistically, literally correct.
Yeah, geographically correct. People tend to view finding love as this, highly personalized, almost mystical endeavor. We think it's all fate and chemistry.
Or just, having better photos on your dating app.
Right, better lighting. But when you aggregate millions of data points from U.S. Census records to global financial indices, you start to see that romance is fiercely governed by supply, demand, and municipal infrastructure.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are mapping out the literal geography of love, singlehood, and the economics of dating. We are looking at the hard data behind where you should actually be looking for a partner.
Because if you're casting your net in the wrong ocean, it doesn't matter how great your profile is.
Right. And to build this map, we are pulling from a massive stack of sources. We've got U.S. Census data analyses by Smart Asset, global financial indices from Deutsche Bank and WalletHub, and these really deep demographic reports from platforms like Dating.com, Zumper, MoneyLion, and Zoocasa.
It's a lot of data. We're talking the top 25 best and worst cities to be single, places where the gender ratios are wildly skewed, and the very literal singles tax.
Oh yeah, the singles tax. We are definitely getting into how much a standard date costs around the world and how your local wages completely dictate whether a city is actually affordable for singles.
So, where should we start?
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the baseline geography. Before we get into the cost of romance or who is dating whom, we just need to know, where is everybody?
The demographic divide.
Yeah. If you were single, where are your people congregated? And conversely, where are the marriage capitals?
Yeah.
Because looking at the Smart Asset analysis of U.S. Census data, the divide is incredibly stark.
It really is. If you are searching for the absolute epicenter of singlehood in the United States, the data points overwhelmingly to the Great Lakes region.
The Great Lakes.
Yeah. Specifically, Detroit, Michigan. According to the analysis, Detroit claims the title for the most single city in the country. Up to 58.5% of the adult population there has never been married.
Wait, nearly 6 out of every 10 adults walking around Detroit have never tied the knot. That's massive.
It's a huge concentration.
Yeah.
And it isn't an isolated anomaly either. You see Rochester, New York sitting right alongside them, fluctuating between 56.4 and 58.5% never married.
And Boston is right up there too, right? Hitting up to 57.4%.
Yeah.
Then you have Newark, Cleveland, Milwaukee, and Washington, D.C., all showing these massive populations of people who've just never been married.
Right. And to understand why these massive clusters exist, we have to stop looking at them as just cities. We need to start looking at them as distinct economic ecosystems.
That makes sense.
Let's take Boston and Rochester first. The mechanism driving their single populations is largely academic and institutional.
Because of the universities.
Exactly. You have massive university ecosystems, research hospitals, function as talent incubators.
Right, so I like to think of this using an analogy. Cities basically have two distinct functions for relationships. You have your waiting room cities and your settling down room cities.
Oh, like that.
Yeah, so Boston and D.C. are the ultimate waiting rooms. You go there to get your degree, you share some cramped apartment with 3 roommates, you climb the first few rungs of your career ladder, and you date constantly.
You're building your individual life before you merge it with someone else's.
Exactly. And the infrastructure of a waiting room city actively supports that lifestyle. You see a high density of multifamily housing, walkable neighborhoods, extensive public transit,
and a huge proliferation of bars, coffee shops, and late-night venues. The urban planning literally facilitates mingling.
Yeah, D.C. in particular is famous for this transient, highly ambitious young workforce. People cycle in for a presidential administration or a fellowship. They stay for maybe 3 years, and then they leave.
Which naturally suppresses the marriage rate. You aren't going to buy a house and settle down if you know you're leaving in 36 months.
But wait, let me challenge this slightly.
Yeah.
Because if Boston and D.C. are these bustling academic waiting rooms full of young professionals, Detroit and Cleveland don't really fit that exact same profile.
No, they don't.
So is Detroit highly single because it's a young, vibrant, transient hub? Or is it because economic factors are actively delaying marriage? Because we know financial instability is one of the biggest reasons people put off getting married.
That is a crucial distinction, and it's a fantastic point. Detroit's high single rate operates on a completely different mechanism than Boston's.
Okay, break that down to me.
In Detroit's case, we are looking at the long-term echoes of deindustrialization and economic restructuring. Historically, marriage is an institution deeply tied to wealth building and financial security. So when you have a city that has faced decades of job market volatility, lower median incomes, and housing market crises, the baseline financial stability that many people require before they feel ready to marry is just harder to achieve.
So in Boston, people are single because they are prioritizing education and their early career.
Yeah.
But in Detroit, people might be single because the local economy simply isn't providing the stability necessary for family formation.
Precisely. And that nuance matters immensely when we talk about the best cities for dating. Just because a city has a massive volume of single people doesn't mean it has a frictionless dating scene.
Oh, for sure.
Huh.
Because if a high percentage of those singles are dealing with economic anxiety, that fundamentally changes the psychology of dating in that city.
Yeah.
You're not going out for expensive cocktails if you're worried about rent.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's flip it. Let's look at the absolute opposite end of the spectrum. If Detroit and Boston are the single capitals, where is the ultimate settling down room?
The quintessential settling down room, according to the top 25 data, is Fremont, California. Yeah. In Fremont, an overwhelming 63.8% of adults are currently married. Only 26.4% have never been married.
Wow.
And perhaps fundamentally linked to that stability, Fremont boasts the lowest divorce rate in the entire study, sitting at just 4.8%.
Fremont, California.
Yep.
Okay, so just for context for you listening, Fremont is in the Bay Area. It is incredibly expensive. It's home to major tech companies. It's where a massive Tesla factory is located. And the median household income is just astronomical compared to the national average.
Yes.
So what we are seeing here is basically a gated community for established dual-income tech couples.
That's exactly what it is. It acts entirely as a structural filter. The cost of entry into Fremont, whether you're buying a home or even just renting, is so prohibitively high that you essentially need a dual-income household to afford it comfortably.
So the single people are just priced out.
Pretty much. The people who migrate to Fremont, or the ones who manage to stay there, are largely those who have already paired off and pooled their resources. And the zoning laws play a massive role here, too.
Walk me through that. How does city zoning actually affect your relationship status?
Well, if a city zones heavily for single-family homes with large yards, and they actively restrict the construction of high-density apartments or mixed-use commercial properties with bars and late-night venues, it inherently becomes hostile to the single lifestyle.
Because singles thrive on density. They need affordable one-bedroom apartments and third places to meet people.
Right. And Fremont is highly zoned for family life. It has excellent public schools, sprawling neighborhoods. It is designed for stability, not the chaos of single mingling.
Which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And looking at the list, other highly married cities in the top 25 include Plano, Texas, and Colorado Springs. Both completely fit that suburban, family-oriented, high-stability profile.
They absolutely do.
But wait, I do have a question about this Bay Area thing. Fremont is right next to San Jose and the broader Silicon Valley area. How can one city be the definitive marriage capital? Well, just down the highway, you have cities famous for being massive bubbles of single young tech workers. Like, where is the spillover?
The spillover is managed by exactly what we just discussed, real estate and urban planning. San Jose and San Francisco provide the entry-level tech jobs, the studio apartments, and the nightlife. They act as the waiting rooms.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, once those tech workers hit their 30s, marry another tech worker, and decide they want a backyard and a highly rated public school, they migrate out of San Francisco and into Fremont or Palo Alto.
That is fascinating. The cities operate in a symbiotic loop. The region uses different municipalities to house people at different stages of their romantic lives. We literally sort ourselves into different zip codes based on our relationship status without even realizing we're doing it.
We really do.
But what happens when that stability fractures? The data also tracks divorce rates in these cities. So where are marriages ending the most?
The census data highlights a few specific areas. Shreveport, Louisiana, consistently ranks near the top of the worst lists with a 15.9% divorce rate. You also see Spokane, Washington at 15%, and a distinct cluster in Florida, specifically Hialeah and St. Petersburg, hovering around 15.6%.
And we have to talk about the massive anomaly in the Smart Asset Report. They flagged Columbus, Georgia, with an astronomical 38% divorce rate.
Yeah, that number is wild.
It's perfectly split. 38% married, 38% divorced, 38% never married. What on earth is happening in Columbus?
Well, when you see a statistical outlier that extreme, it almost never represents a broader cultural trend. It points to a hyperlocal, manufactured demographic. In the case of Columbus, Georgia, you are looking at the immediate proximity to Fort Moore.
Fort Moore, so a massive U.S. Army installation.
Exactly. This is the military town effect. Military towns create highly pressurized demographic bubbles. You have a massive influx of very young people who are financially incentivized to get married quickly.
Because the military provides better housing allowances, benefits, and higher pay for married service members.
Right. So this often leads to expedited marriages among 18 to 21-year-olds. But unfortunately, the intense stress of military life, frequent deployments, and frankly just the young age of the couples, inevitably leads to a significantly higher than average divorce rate.
Wow.
The stat in Columbus is a perfect illustration of how a single dominant local industry can completely warp the relationship statistics of an entire city.
And with places like Shreveport or Spokane, we're likely looking at a mix of economic pressures. Lower median incomes combined with a lack of economic mobility act as a massive stressor on marriages. It just proves that relationship longevity isn't just about how much you love your partner.
No, it's heavily influenced by the macroeconomic environment around you, which actually brings us to a crucial pivot in the data, because knowing that a city is full of single people is only half the battle.
You have to know who those single people are.
Exactly. And the most startling data we found in this deep dive is how drastically uneven the distribution of single men and single women is across the country.
This is where the whole plenty of fish in the sea concept falls completely apart. Because what if you are fishing in a sea that literally doesn't contain the fish you're looking for?
Right, you're just casting into an empty pond.
Let's talk about gender ratios. Supply, demand, and dating ecosystems.
Yeah.
Because if you are a single person struggling to find a date, you might be totally internalizing the failure. You're staring at your phone thinking, am I not attractive enough? Is my profile bio boring?
When in reality, the math might simply be rigged against you.
Exactly. The numerical imbalances in certain American cities are staggering. Let's start with where men vastly outnumber women. If you are a single woman looking for a single man, your absolute statistical paradise is Oceanside, California.
The data on Oceanside is incredible. There are 152.7 single men for every 100 single women.
That is essentially 3 men for every 2 women. If you are a single woman there, the odds are so heavily in your favor, it's almost absurd. And it's not just Oceanside, looking at the top 25 list. Miami has a ratio of 138 single men for every 100 single women.
And Fremont, our marriage capital, also has a huge surplus of single men, sitting at 136.7 per 100 women.
Then you have Fayetteville, North Carolina, hovering around 137 to 141, depending on the survey year, and Paradise, Nevada at 137.1.
And just like we saw with the divorce rates in Columbus, Georgia, when we ask why these male-heavy bubbles exist, the answer is almost always tied to the dominant local industry.
Industry again. So what's driving Oceanside?
Oceanside, California is directly adjacent to Camp Pendleton, which is one of the largest Marine Corps bases in the world. Fayetteville, North Carolina is home to Fort Liberty.
Ah, military bases.
Yes, these massive military installations import tens of thousands of young, predominantly single men, creating an artificial demographic bubble that just spills over into the local civilian dating scene.
Which means if you're a local single woman in Fayetteville, you have an endless supply of dates. But if you are a civilian single man in Fayetteville, your dating pool is completely flooded with competition.
You're at a massive statistical disadvantage.
What about a place like Fremont or San Jose, which also ranks incredibly high with about 124 men per 100 women?
That is the Silicon Valley tech effect. While the tech industry has definitely made strides in recent years, engineering, software development, and the surrounding venture capital ecosystems have historically drawn a disproportionately male workforce.
Right, so the migration patterns of young men moving to the Bay Area for these high-paying tech roles completely skews the local dating ratios.
It does. It warps the whole region.
And Miami. That one surprised me. I mean, you don't necessarily think of Miami as a military base or a tech hub.
Miami is a really unique hybrid case. It is heavily driven by a massive hospitality and nightlife industry. But in recent years, it has also become this massive hub for crypto, finance, and real estate entrepreneurs.
Oh, the crypto bros.
Exactly. This specific blend of industries attracts a huge influx of young male professionals. Furthermore, Miami has a highly transient party culture that heavily appeals to unattached men with a lot of disposable income.
Okay, let's look at the other side of the coin. Where do single women vastly outnumber single men? And looking at the data, the American South absolutely dominates this list.
It does, and the margins are severe. Birmingham, Alabama is the starkest example in the smart asset data. In Birmingham, there are only 81.9 single men for every 100 single women.
Just think about the reality of that number. That means that nearly 20% of the single women in Birmingham mathematically cannot pair up with a single man from their own city, assuming an entirely heterosexual pairing model for the sake of this specific census metric.
Right, 1 in 5 women simply does not have a statistical counterpart locally.
And the list continues. Washington, D.C. is another prime example. Depending on the year of the survey, D.C. hovers around 84.5 to 86.4 single men per 100 single women.
New Orleans is similarly skewed with about 85.3 men, and Baltimore sits at 86.4 men per 100 women.
You also see Greensboro, North Carolina, and Shreveport, Louisiana, right at the top of the list for a massive surplus of single women. Also notice Rochester, New York in there. The data pointed out that Rochester is one of the only non-southern cities to make the top 5 for a female surplus, with only 86.7 single men per 100 women.
So break down the mechanisms here. Why do these specific cities have such a massive deficit of single men?
Well, we are looking at 2 completely different socioeconomic phenomena here, right?
We are. Let's look at Washington, D.C. first. This is the classic example of a knowledge economy skew.
What does that mean exactly?
Across the United States, women are currently graduating from college and obtaining master's degrees at significantly higher rates than men.
Right, the education gap.
Yeah, and Washington, D.C., with its massive ecosystem of government agencies, NGOs, lobbying firms, and nonprofits, acts as a powerful magnet for highly educated female professionals. Women migrate to D.C. for these white-collar jobs, and because the influx of educated women is so high, the gender ratio aggressively tilts.
That perfectly explains D.C. and likely Rochester with its massive university and healthcare sectors. But what is happening in the South? Why are cities like Birmingham, New Orleans, and Shreveport so heavily skewed toward women?
The southern cities represent a much more complex and, frankly, systemic demographic shift. It's driven by several overlapping factors. First, you have migration patterns.
Like people moving away for work.
Yes. Historically, as industrial and blue-collar manufacturing jobs have hollowed out in certain southern urban centers, young men are more likely to migrate away to the Sunbelt boomtowns out west or to the oil fields in search of work. This creates a brawn drain that removes single men from the local economy.
Brawn drain. So the men are leaving for work, but the women are staying.
Often, yes. Women are statistically more likely to find employment in localized service, healthcare, and education sectors, which keeps them anchored to the city. But beyond migration, we also have to acknowledge the systemic issues that physically remove men from the dating pool.
You mean like mortality rates in the justice system?
Exactly. The data implicitly reflects the realities of higher male mortality rates, largely driven by occupational hazards and health disparities, as well as significantly higher male incarceration rates.
Right.
When you combine economic outmigration with these systemic issues, you drastically hollow out the population of marriage-age men in these urban centers.
It is so crucial to put a human face on these statistics. I mean, if you are a single woman in D.C. or Birmingham and you feel like the dating scene is a barren wasteland where no one wants to commit, it is not you. You are dealing with local supply chain economics.
The supply of single men simply does not meet the demand, which changes the entire culture of dating.
Because when one gender significantly outnumbers the other, the minority gender holds all the leverage. In D.C., single men have an overwhelming paradox of choice, which sociologically leads to lower commitment rates. But in Oceanside, the single women hold all the leverage.
Which means if you are a civilian guy in Oceanside or a tech worker in San Jose wondering why you aren't getting any matches on your dating apps, you are essentially trying to get noticed in an entirely oversaturated market.
You are competing against 150 other guys for the attention of 100 women? The algorithm isn't broken, your local geography is just working against you?
It just emphasizes that finding a partner isn't solely about emotional readiness or personal growth. It is an intense logistical challenge.
And logistics lead us directly to the next major hurdle for singles. Because once you finally locate someone in your demographic pool, you actually have to take them somewhere. You have to pay for a date.
Let's talk about the price of romance. We've mapped out the demographics, but now we need to look at the global and local economics of dating, because the sticker shock in this data is visceral.
It really is. So let's start with the global extremes, courtesy of Deutsche Bank's annual Mapping the World's Prices report. To standardize the data, they created something called the Cheap Date Index.
I love the cheap date index.
Right. This index calculates the exact same itinerary across dozens of global cities. It's a couple of movie tickets, a couple of soft drinks, a simple meal like a burger or pizza, a couple of beers, and cab rides for two.
It sounds like the most standard, low-pressure Saturday night imaginable. How expensive could that possibly be?
Well, if you attempt that exact itinerary in Geneva, Switzerland, it will cost you $475.
$475 for a movie, a burger, some beers, and a taxi. I could literally fly to another state for less than that. How is that functionally possible?
Switzerland absolutely dominates the most expensive list. Zurich is right behind it, where just the basic index costs $203. But the moment you upgrade the simple meal to a standard restaurant dinner, it skyrockets past $300.
That's insane.
The underlying reason for Geneva's astronomical cost is a combination of massive localized wealth, a highly protected domestic supply chain that drives up the cost of food and services, and the incredibly strong Swiss franc. A simple service worker in Geneva makes a very high wage, and that wage is baked into the cost of your movie ticket and your hamburger.
This study also notes that cities like Oslo, Copenhagen, and Tel Aviv are right at the top of the list. Tel Aviv, in particular, has seen massive spikes in the cost of living over the last decade, pushing it past traditional legacy cities like Paris or Berlin.
But if you want to date on a strict budget, the report highlights the other end of the spectrum. Delhi, India, is the absolute cheapest major global city for a date. That exact same itinerary, movies, meal, drinks, cab costs just $103.
Wow, quite a difference.
And if you're looking strictly at Europe, Istanbul is your cheapest option, coming in at around 163 euros.
Though, we should definitely add the context the data provides regarding Istanbul. Due to massive inflation and currency collapse in Turkey over the last few years, Istanbul is cheap for a tourist holding euros or American dollars. But for the actual residents earning Turkish lira, the local cost of dating has become incredibly burdensome.
Which brings up a fundamental economic concept that is absolutely vital for anyone trying to understand this data, right? The difference between absolute costs and relative costs.
Yes, this is so important.
It is one thing to look at the raw dollar amount price tag of a pizza. It is an entirely different thing to look at what percentage of your local paycheck that pizza consumes.
Let's apply this to the United States. We have the Moneyline report tracking the absolute costs of dating across major U.S. cities.
And if you are dating in New York City, the absolute cost is brutal. A standard 3-course dinner for two and a round-trip taxi will run you $351.
$351.
Yeah. Philadelphia is surprisingly close behind at $295. Los Angeles is $274, and Boston is $272.
And Dating.com highlighted Miami for having a particularly vicious singles tax. We talked earlier about Miami's massive influx of young male professionals and its nightlife-driven culture. Well, participating in that culture is prohibitively expensive.
Oh, I bet.
The data calculates that just taking yourself out for a solo date night in Miami costs about $110. If you want to engage in the actual social scene, hitting the beach clubs or the nightlife venues where singles actually mingle, you are looking at an average of $200 per night. Miami is engineered to extract maximum capital from its single population.
But there are pockets of absolute affordability in the U.S., and the Hearst study got incredibly specific with these metrics. If your go-to date is grabbing a pizza, you want to be in Austin or Charlotte, where a cheese pizza averages under $11.
That's pretty good.
If you love the movies, Phoenix and Detroit have the absolute cheapest movie tickets at around $11.25. And if you need to look good before the date, Las Vegas surprisingly offers the cheapest haircuts in the country, alongside some of the cheapest fitness club memberships.
But this is where the concept of relative cost turns the entire dataset on its head. The HERS study didn't just look at the price of a movie ticket. They cross-referenced the cost of standard dating activities, things like cell phone plans to use dating apps, the cost of pizza, haircuts, movies, yoga classes, and a bottle of wine with the average personal income of the city's residents.
And when you do that, the quote-unquote most expensive cities suddenly don't look so bad.
Precisely. Because while cities like San Francisco, Boston, and Washington, D.C. have very high absolute costs, meaning a movie ticket might be $18 and a haircut might be $80, the median incomes in those specific cities are so phenomenally high that dating actually consumes a significantly smaller percentage of a single person's monthly paycheck.
Okay, let me make sure I'm following this. You're saying a $150 date in Washington, D.C. feels less painful to a local resident than a $100 date feels to someone living in a city with lower average wages.
Exactly. The financial friction of dating is much lower in D.C. despite the high price tags. The data shows that the cities where the cost of dating is the absolute largest burden on your income are places like Riverside, California, San Antonio, Texas, and Orlando, Florida.
Oh, so the mid-tier cities.
Yeah, in these cities, you have a dangerous combination of moderately high regional costs fueled by inflation paired with significantly lower median wages. So Detroit might have the absolute cheapest movie tickets in the country, and Charlotte might have the cheapest pizza, but when you factor in the lower local salaries, going out on a date in those cities represents a much heavier financial sacrifice.
Which fundamentally changes how people behave. I mean, if dating takes up 15% of your disposable income in San Antonio versus 5% in San Francisco, people in San Antonio are going to go on fewer dates.
They have to.
They're going to be more cautious about who they meet. They might delay mingling entirely. It's wild how local wage stagnation directly suppresses romantic mingling.
And we see this exact dynamic play out when we look at international stereotypes versus data realities.
Yes. Let's talk about Paris. When anyone thinks of a romantic European vacation, the immediate cliche is the city of love. You picture walking along the Seine, drinking wine, falling in love. But the Drift Travel study on spring fling destinations absolutely eviscerated the Paris stereotype. They ranked Paris a dismal 21st in Europe for finding love.
The data really tore the mythology apart. When they measured actual, tangible metrics that facilitate romance, Paris scored terribly.
Like what kind of metrics?
Well, it had a shockingly low nightlife score, only 34 out of 100. It had a surprisingly mediocre LGBTQ plus friendliness score compared to its neighbors. And the absolute costs were incredibly high, which we know creates friction.
And my absolute favorite metric of the entire deep dive, Paris was literally penalized for bad sunsets.
That is hilarious.
The study measured clear skies and sunset visibility, and Paris scored poorly. You can't have a romantic evening walk if the weather is miserable and expensive. Meanwhile, Madrid took the #1 spot in Europe.
Madrid's data profile is essentially perfect for romance. It has a thriving nightlife score of 85.9 out of 100, which means there are endless affordable third places, tapas bars, cafes, plazas, where singles can linger and interact without spending €100.
That's huge for spontaneous dating.
It has incredible inclusivity metrics, a massive single population, and fantastic weather for those sunset metrics. Prague and Lisbon were right behind it. The reality of where romance thrives economically and socially is incredibly different from the movies.
This brings us to the ultimate question. We have mapped out the demographics, we know where the men and women are hiding, and we understand the intense economics of the singles tax. So when you aggregate all this data into a final score, who actually wins?
The best of the best.
Yeah, if our listener is sitting in their apartment right now, staring at their budget, exhausted by their local dating pool, and thinking, I need to start over, I need to move, where do the experts say they should go?
This is where things get slightly complicated, because we have several major studies that declare a definitive winner, and they fundamentally disagree with each other.
Of course they do.
They disagree because they prioritize entirely different metrics of human happiness. Let's start with WalletHub's 2025 report. They analyzed 182 American cities across 35 distinct metrics ranging from local economics to fun and recreation options to raw dating opportunities. Their definitive #1 best city for singles is Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta. That is a major endorsement. Why does Atlanta take the crown?
Atlanta manages to hit a demographic and economic sweet spot that very few other cities can match. First, the raw dating pool is massive. Nearly 70% of the city's population is single when you combine the never married, widowed, and divorced demographics.
70%. That's a huge pool.
Second, it has an incredibly high density of attractions. We're talking restaurants, nightlife options, social clubs, and recreational spaces per capita. It has the infrastructure of a waiting room city. But crucially, the median annual household income exceeds $85,000, which helps significantly offset the sting of inflation and dating costs.
It's the total package. You have a massive pool of potential partners, an endless list of things to do, and enough regional wealth to actually afford doing them. But while Atlanta makes sense, Wallet Hub's #2 city really threw me, Las Vegas.
Las Vegas is the great dark horse of these demographic studies. When people hear Vegas, they immediately think of the Strip, bachelor parties, and extreme transients.
Exactly. You don't think of settling down.
But when you look at the underlying data for the actual residents living off the Strip, it is a powerhouse. Yes, it has incredibly diverse nightlife, but it's also surprisingly cheap for the day-to-day logistics of dating. We mentioned earlier that it has the cheapest haircuts and very affordable gym memberships. It ranks incredibly well for gender balance among singles.
And as the Wallet Hub report cheekily points out, if a date goes incredibly well, you can literally get hitched by an Elvis impersonator at 2 a.m. That is a very specific municipal amenity that you just cannot get in Boston.
Sure.
But let's look at a completely different scorecard. Zumper, the massive rental platform, ran their own data study for 2025. They ranked 100 cities, but because they are a real estate platform, they heavily weighted rent prices, the broader cost of living, and unemployment rates alongside the social factors. Their #1 city, St. Louis, Missouri.
Which perfectly illustrates the priority shift. In St. Louis, the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment is only $1,000 a month. Nearly half the population is single, and despite the low cost, it still ranks in the top 5 nationally for nightlife and entertainment access.
So it's affordable and fun.
Zumper's top 3 cities are St. Louis, Knoxville, Tennessee, and Salt Lake City, Utah. These are cities that provide a decent social scene but prioritize extreme housing affordability. They're saying the best way to be a successful single person is to not be broke.
Contrast that with Fetish Finder's study, which looks specifically at the 20 largest U.S. cities. They controversially named New York City and Los Angeles as the absolute worst cities for dating.
Which completely runs counter to the cultural narrative. You would assume the biggest cities in the country, with the most people, would inherently have the best dating scenes.
Because the math says more people equals more options.
But the Fetish Finder study heavily penalized NYC and LA for the burnout metric. That's the exhausting cost of living, the terrible commute times, and poor quality of life indicators.
This makes so much sense. Think about the logistics of dating in Los Angeles. It might take you an hour and 15 minutes in bumper-to-bumper traffic just to travel 5 miles to meet someone for a drink.
Right, by the time you get there, you're already exhausted.
And in New York, you are navigating incredibly expensive cocktails and exhausting subway commutes, all while paying $3,000 a month for a studio apartment. The daily grind of surviving in those megacities financially and logistically leaves people too burned out to date successfully. The juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Exactly. The structural friction is too high. That study placed Seattle at #1, citing a high monthly average of people actively looking for relationships online and a great overall quality of life, despite Seattle's high expenses. They argue that Seattle offers the density of a major city without the absolute gridlock burnout of LA or New York.
But this is exactly where we need your synthesis. We have Wallet Hub putting Seattle at #4, but Zumper didn't have it anywhere near the top because the rent in Seattle is astronomically high. If our listener wants to optimize their life for love, how do they navigate these conflicting scorecards? How do they choose?
It comes down to identifying your personal Goldilocks zone based on what is holding you back right now. You have to diagnose your own dating friction.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Well, if your problem is simply a lack of options, if you are tired of seeing the same 50 people on your apps, your priority is raw, overwhelming dating pool size. The data points you to Detroit or Boston.
But if your problem is that you literally cannot afford to go out and mingle because 60% of your paycheck goes to rent, Your priority is disposable income. You need to move to St. Louis or Knoxville.
Correct. But if you want the true Goldilocks zone, the perfect intersection of a massive dating pool, affordable activities, good gender balance, and high enough wages to enjoy it all without going bankrupt, the data firmly points to Atlanta or Las Vegas.
And there's one final piece to this puzzle that makes the Atlanta recommendation so compelling, and it comes from the real estate data provided by Zoocasa. Because deciding to pack up and move to find love isn't just a social decision, it's ultimately a massive financial and real estate decision.
Yes. Zoocasa compared the cost of renting versus buying in these top-tier dating cities. They found that rent in Atlanta is actually 28% higher than rent in Las Vegas. So if you plan to be a renter for the foreseeable future, Vegas is the better economic play.
Okay, but what if you want to buy?
If your long-term goal is to eventually buy a house with this future partner you are hoping to meet, the average home price in Atlanta is around $374,000.
Which is well below the national average of roughly $443,000.
Exactly. So Atlanta gives you the top-tier dating scene with a highly accessible path to homeownership, whereas a city like Seattle, which ranks great for dating activity and quality of life, has housing costs that are astronomically higher.
So you might find a partner in Seattle, but you will face a massive barrier to long-term financial stability when you decide to settle down. Atlanta allows you to date and build equity. We have covered so much ground today. To quickly summarize this deep dive for you, finding love is not just about changing your wardrobe or working on your opening lines. It is an intense mix of knowing your local demographic ratios.
Are you a single guy swimming in a tech hub ocean with way too many men? Or are you a single woman in D.C. fighting a massive statistical disadvantage?
It's understanding your dating budget relative to your local income, not just the absolute cost of a pizza. And crucially, it's recognizing whether your city's zoning and infrastructure are built for single mingling or married nesting.
It is about strategically aligning your geography with your relationship goals. And taking all of this data into account leaves us with a final, rather provocative thought to mull over.
Ooh, lay it on me.
Over the past few years, the widespread adoption of remote work has created a massive wave of internal migration across the country. We have seen hundreds of thousands of people pack up and move across state lines to optimize their state taxes, to buy a cheaper house with a yard, or to be closer to the mountains. They moved purely for economics and lifestyle.
Right, the great reshuffling. People completely decoupled their physical location from their employment.
But based on the staggering demographic imbalances we've unpacked today, are we about to enter a new era of dating migrations? Will we start seeing singles strategically optimizing their zip codes specifically to find a partner?
Oh, wow, that is interesting.
Think about the stark numbers and the gender ratios. If you are a single, remote working woman living in Washington, D.C., where you are fighting a severe statistical deficit of men, is packing up your laptop and moving to Oceanside, California, where men outnumber women 152 to 100, the greatest dating hack of all time.
That is absolutely brilliant. Don't change your bio, change your coordinates. Let the laws of supply and demand do the heavy lifting for your love life. If you have the freedom to work from anywhere, why wouldn't you work from a statistical paradise?
Exactly. It's just simple math.
That's a fascinating question and something for you to seriously think about the next time you log into a dating app and see the exact same 5 people in your neighborhood. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the data of dating.
Yes, thank you.
We hope you're leaving with a little less dating fatigue and a whole lot more demographic strategy. Keep casting those nets, but maybe check the municipal zoning map first. See you next time.
Thank you for listening
and watching on the new Speed Mingle TV network.